welcome to Saturday Night at the Movies, the podcast that celebrates classic, cult, and current films and the people that made them, and many other aspects of pop culture. I'm your host, Steve Rubin. Our producer is Ben Shrewsbury, and our signature theme was composed by Greg Lerhoff. Here it's always Saturday night, and our mission is to chronicle film and pop cultural history one memory at a time. Tonight, we welcome one of our favorite actors of all time, Mr. Russ Tamblyn, who is also a fine artist and the author of a fascinating new autobiography entitled Dancing on the Edge. Welcome, Russ.
Well, thank you. It's good to see you.
We actually met once, briefly. You won't remember it, but I worked for Showtime for 10 years. I was a publicist then, and I worked on the remake of Inherit the Wind.
Oh,
And you had a small part in that with George C.
very small.
But I remember it was one of those busy sets where I had no time to say anything other than hello. And now I'm making up for lost time. Let's see, that was 1999. So it's now 25 years later. Wow. Your book, for the listeners and viewers today, I mean, Russ's book is absolutely fascinating. It's not only a tremendous insight into his rather eclectic life, but it's almost a total window. It's not almost, it is a window into Hollywood going all the way back to the 40s. And I thank you for writing this great book, Russ. It was just a lot of fun to read.
Well, thank you very much. You made my day.
So one of the things I do on my show, we love to find out about where people started getting in love with the movies. I know that you grew up in Inglewood. In one of the listings, it says that your first dance performance was on the stage of the Granada Theater. Is that correct?
Yeah, in a way. I mean, it wasn't a performance that was planned or anything. I just ran up on the stage and jumped around.
Now, for a lot of kids, first of all, the idea of going on any stage anywhere would be petrifying. But the fact that you decided to dance onto the stage, where did this motivation come from? Had you had a couple of Coca-Colas, or what was the deal?
No, I think it was the situation in itself. It was a theater that on Saturday mornings showed cartoons and serials like Superman and Batman, and kids used to go there every Saturday afternoon, and it was filled with just kids, and so um, I think it was during an intermission or something, or in between films. Uh, I got inspired to run up on the stage, and everybody was noisy anyway. So we which kind of took over the theater. So I ran up on the stage and went into a little offbeat dance thing. It was really just jumping around. It was kind of silly.
Now,
And I did that for 2 or 3 weeks in a row. And I went up there, and the kids got to know me, say, "Oh yeah," they started applauding me. And then finally, I think about the third week, the manager of the theater was waiting backstage. He knew I was coming. I was going to come up there, and he came out on the stage and grabbed me and took me back to the office, and then asked me for my phone number. And like a fool, I gave it to him, and he called my mother and told her I was making a pest out of myself. So that's the story on that one. And then so she decided to start me in tap dancing lessons, which I started to do in Inglewood at the Bob Cole dance studio.
when you were first going to the movies as a kid, were there certain movies that you gravitated for? I mean, the obvious answer for me is that you saw Fred Astaire dance type movies. Were those part of the things you liked, or was it a more eclectic look?
That was later. I mean, I really started watching and was turned on by by Western movies, cowboy movies, and probably like every other kid, the movies I was really interested in.
Sure, sure. No, of course, of course. Um, what was, as I mentioned earlier, the book is an interesting window on early Hollywood. Today, the studio lots are, I don't know how to say it other than they're business places where people do business. Obviously, they do make movies and television shows on these lots, but I gather back in the 40s when you came to MGM, late 40s, early 50s, I get the impression it was different then, that there was more of a community feeling in the studio system. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I think that's pretty accurate. Especially, I think I was like a part of the last bit uh, of studio system uh, things where there were not only actors under contract at MGM, but directors, writers. Uh, so they were all a part of it. And it was before the studio system really broke down. And there were a lot of contract players, not only MGM, but Universal and 20th Century Fox. They all had their little families.
Sure. And of course, MGM was a sprawling enterprise. Not only did they have the main lot, but they had the lot two across the street, and then they had the back lot closer to the Baldwin Hills off of Jefferson. You were
But
probably on all of those lots, I would assume.
oh yeah, I worked on pretty much all of them, I think. Always, and even when it wasn't working, I used to go there and I used to go there in my car and drive around the crazy sets.
Like a playground. It's funny when James Aubrey took over the studio back in the 70s, actually, it was earlier than that, 60s, he decided to sell off all that property. And looking at how much money Universal has made over the years on their tour, MGM would have probably been able to outdo Universal times 10. Um, when you were working on shows, would you visit other film sets where other actors were performing?
Yeah, all the time.
Did you get a chance to see Gene Kelly perform at all?
Um, he, Not really. I don't think I ever watched him do a dance number or anything or perform in that manner. But uh, I did see him on the lot a lot, many times, and also another time that was a big surprise was that I was going to school on the lot at the little red schoolhouse, and Dean Stockwell was going to school with there, and we were buddies, and we used to at break time we'd go up to my dressing room and we used to wrestle around and make a lot of noise. And we got a knock on the door one time, and we opened the door, and it was Gene Kelly, and he said, "Hey, listen, you guys, I'm trying to get a rest. My dressing room is right below you. Do you think you could hold it down a little bit?" So we apologized, and he says, "I sell smoke in here. Dean, are you smoking cigarettes now?" He said to Stockwell, and Dean said, "Yeah, just not all the time, but just here." And he says, "Don't worry, I won't say anything, but they're not good for you." And so that was my experience with Gene Kelly then.
And of course, with Dean Stockwell, you made your film debut on his movie The Boy with Green Hair.
That's where we met. Yeah.
Right, right. Well, many for many people, they always associate you with one of the great roles of an actor's given, which of course is in West Side Story. And I wanted to put up a picture from that. Basically, you know, I got to tell you, when they talk about cool cats of the 50s and 60s, they seem to gravitate towards Steve McQueen, who obviously was very cool. But I got to tell you, your character riff in West Side Story is one of the coolest cats I've ever seen on screen.
Oh, thanks.
I know that you saw the play on Broadway and you were trying to get a role in the film. Now, in the book, you mentioned that you had your sights set on Tony.
Yes,
Isn't that true?
true.
But
But
Riff, yeah,
they MGM let me go and test for that because I was under contract at MGM, and the West Side Story was made at Allied Artists Studio, so they let me go over there and test for the part of Tony, which I did, and I maybe made tests with with 4 or 5 different actresses that were testing for the part of Maria.
right.
Barbara Luna, there were several, Anna Maria Alberghetti, there were a bunch of them, and I had the same agent as Robert Wise, who was the director of the movie. So I used to call him and say, well, how's it going? They say, well, you're still in contention, and so finally, then he called me one time and said, well, you came close, but they gave the part to an actor named Richard Beamer, who's played. I says, "Oh, that's awful." And yeah, but they've offered you the role of Riff, and I was really surprised because Riff was a really hardcore dancer uh, in the film, and so he said, "So do you want to do that role?" And I thought, "Yes, I'll do it." And it turned out that it was really a better part for me than the part of Tony. And Tony was like the worst part in the movie, always for actors, because it was the action was always with it in the gangs, with the sharks and the jets, is where all the action was. And the guy who played Tony, he was like out of it, kind of like in a dreamy world of. So it turned out to be a much better part than the part of Tony.
Now you knew Jerome Robbins as well because didn't he work on Seven Brides for Seven Brothers, or was he involved in?
No, he had nothing to do with
Oh,
it.
no. But did you know Jerome Robbins before West Side Story?
Only heard of him. I only heard of him
Oh,
and heard, that he was this huge genius, and he made a lot of Broadway shows, and so that's about all I really knew about him.
okay. Now, normally we don't hear too much about your gang, but I thought today or tonight, I should say, I ask you just to get a few questions from some of your gang members who don't get the spotlight as much. For instance, Tucker Smith played Ice. What can you tell me about Tucker Smith that you remember?
Oh, I just remember that they switched in the theater productions. Um, uh, Riff did in the Broadway show. Riff did the cool number, and then they switched it around, and they had me do the Krupke number, Officer Krupke, and they gave that the cool number to him.
It's funny because the cool number seems to work really well after the fight because everybody's so hot-headed.
And that's what they thought, and that's why they changed it before we made the film.
Now, Tucker, would you socialize much with Tucker, or were you just working together? That was pretty much it.
Pretty much just work together. Yeah, he was gay, and he had his own. He had his own. gang of people that he knew.
Got
There's
it.
also he was a cross dresser.
Oh,
Uh, I
well,
guess I
that
can say that now.
well, that's not in the book, so thank
No,
you for that tidbit.
there you get a piece of new information.
Well, he's a very handsome boy. I certainly could see why a lot of people were attracted to him. Let me throw up another picture here of let's see, Tony Mordente. Uh, uh, he was very effective as action, and he's the one, of course, that ice has to cool off in the cool off number. What can you tell me about Tony?
Well, he was a good friend of mine on the movie. He was probably one of the guys that I hung around with a lot, and and he was also a close friend of Natalie Woods. And when I had a couple of dinners. Was living at a beach house then in Malibu, and Tony came, and he was like a good friend of, like I said, of Natalie's, and he came. So I knew
Uh,
him.
um, Russ, was he known as a dancer, or was he already a dancer, or did he have to learn?
He was already a dancer. Not only was he a dancer, but he was married to Chita Rivera, who played Anita on Broadway.
Oh, wow.
That was his wife, and he has a couple of kids from Chita.
Is Tony still with us?
No, he just passed away last last year,
Oh,
months ago.
he was very good in the role and certainly filled out your gang nicely. Now, the other actor I wanted to pull up was, let's see if I
Let me
can.
say this, though, if I can interrupt you for a minute, that
Go ahead.
when Jerome Robbins was fired after we were worked in New York, after we did that big opening number in New York, he because Jerry just took too long to shoot it, and when we got back, they had gone like 2 or 3 weeks over the schedule, and so when they fired Jerry, uh, Tony took over the choreography,
Oh,
uh, and and uh, and he said one of the things that Jerry Robbins said to me right from the beginning was when I went in to meet him and meet Bob Wise, and Jerry said to me, he says, "I've seen all your movies, and you do a lot of tumbling in the movies, like in Seven Brides and Tom Thumb." And he said, "But I got to tell you, there'll be no tumbling in this. Riff is not a tumbler." And I said, "Oh, you're just gonna have to do some hardcore dancing." And I said, "Okay, I'll do my best." And so after he left, when Tony took over Mordente, he said, "Let's put some tumbling back in." So that's when we did the dance hall sequence, and I did a backflip with a full twist, and that was, that was great. And it was great for me because I got to do what I could really do well, better than dancing. I was a great acrobat. I was a good one.
well, even in the When You're a Jet, your number, which I believe was shot in New York, was that shot, or was that on both coasts? I know what the opening number was. When You're a Jet shot here in LA or in New York?
I'm trying to remember now. I think it was shot in New York. I can't
Right,
remember because a lot of stuff was shot here at this studio.
right. Well, even when you're in that opening number, the way you lift yourself up on the bar, I could already see the acrobatic Russ Tamblyn
Yeah,
element.
that was where I was right at home.
Oh, sure, sure. No, absolutely. Let me put up another picture here. For the listeners at home, I'm showing him some pictures of some of his castmates. And in the front here, we have David Winters as Arab. Do you remember anything specific about David?
Well, David was a good friend too, that we hung out together on the set, and I had an experience with him when we were right at the beginning before we even started shooting. It was they were checking out wardrobe, so they had all of us there, and we had a break to go to lunch, and it was David Winters that said, "Hey, listen, I think they're auditioning some girls, some female dancers over on a certain stage." So he says, "You want to go over and check them out?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go." So we went over with David, and we came in. We were way in the back of the stage, and we watched him, and the assistant choreographer, one of Jerry's assistant choreographers, uh, he spotted us in the back, and he said, "Russ Tamblyn and David Winters, get off the stage. And so we got frightened. We ran off the stage, and we started to head back to where we were going to have our wardrobe test. And David kept saying, "Russ, you're a star. You're a star. How can you let anybody talk to you like that? You realize he sort of bossed you out in front of in front of all these dancers, and they all know who you are." And the more he talked, the more pissed off I got. And finally, when I got back, we had our wardrobe test, and we were all standing there. And I finally, and I finally, when it was almost done, the wardrobe testing, uh, he came by him, and I grabbed him by the chest, and I pulled him up to me, and I said, "Don't you ever talk to me like that again, or I'm going to knock you on your fucking ass. Do you understand?" And he said, "Yes, Russ. Yes, I understand." And so that was that, and that really set me up. And all of the Jets after that said, "Oh boy, you really became the leader of the gang when you did that."
That's a great story. Uh, and one more person I want to just bring up real quickly here. Let's see. Yes, here is Elliot Feld, who played Baby John. What do you remember about Elliot?
Not too much, other than he was perfect for to play the part of Baby John. I think he did, and and Jerry picked on him a lot. Jerry used to pick on certain dancers that he didn't like. I don't know why. I think because he was gay and he was hitting on him, and so he picked on him a lot. And I remember that.
Hmm.
I didn't, but I didn't socialize with him too much.
Come back here to such a great movie, Russ. A movie that will live forever. And it's just
I agree with you. I thought it was great
oh
too.
yeah. And the reason was asking whether you'd ever seen Gene Kelly dance. Your type of dancing, your type of performance is, I think I could really relate to. I never could relate to Fred Astaire in a tuxedo wielding Ginger Rogers around a dance floor. This is way too formal for me. But with you dancing on the street, and I can't tell you how many times I would be walking down the street and all of a sudden I felt like snapping my fingers. I think West Side Story kind of popularized snapping fingers for everybody.
Well, there weren't many. I think there was only one other musical that was shot on the streets, which Gene Kelly did, and
On the town.
yeah, right on the town.
They never wanted to spend the money, which was interesting. Well, this movie will live forever. Now, before you did West Side Story, I got to tell you, that Tom Thumb as a kid was one of my favorite movies. It's just at a time when today, when there's so many movies that are dark or full of action and violence, Tom Thumb is what I consider perfect family entertainment.
Well, it was one of my smaller parts. I
And
loved doing it. It was a lot of fun.
you
And a
got a
lot of
chance.
people ask me if I enjoyed working with Peter Sellers, and I said, I never worked with anybody. I always had to work by myself because I was, so small.
Is that true? You never did you ever meet Peter Sellers?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, I met him, and he was like a friend, so I knew him pretty. I knew him.
I heard that he was a last minute addition to the cast. I think Terry Thomas recommended him because Peter was virtually unknown over here. Um, but in terms of your dancing, I mean, you really got to show off a lot of your dancing form in that movie.
Yeah, yeah, I did. They it was really they built sets that were just for me, and we had them, and I guess it was cheaper to build those sets in England where we shot it than it was to do it here. But they built it. For instance, when I did the dance on uh, the the uh, uh, the shoes, it's called the dancing shoes.
Right, right. Yeah,
When I did that, they built the bench that I danced on. They built was huge. It was like 90 feet long, really huge, and it was built with braces coming on both sides of it, so they could tilt it like that, and that's they could tilt it. And when they tilt, the camera was part of it. So when they tilted it, the camera tilted too, so it never looked like when you were watching it, it never looked like it looked like I was actually, doing when because I sort of danced and skidded across the top of it and then went upside down. But it was quite fascinating. And then also in that, I did a thing where I ran around I guess it was a circle in the bench, and so I ran around upside down, and they just had to move the camera around so it looked like I ran in one place.
Well, you're working with one of the great fantasy directors of all time, a guy with a childlike mind, Mr. George Pal. Now, given that you're on film sets where you're not working with actors, did George Pal do anything in particular to inspire your imagination? I mean, some people do different things in situations like that. Do you remember anything unusual?
Well, I think one of the things unusual that George did was we were doing a scene one time. I didn't particularly care. I didn't think he was a very good director, and a lot of people didn't think he was a good director because he was. I always thought he had a twinkle in his brain, and he was great at what he did, and one of the giants of creating special effects. In fact, I think I was the first one that they made tests of they made tests of me against a colored background, and they finally came up with the one that was the best, which was a
Green
green.
screen, green screen, sure, of
Yeah,
course.
I think that was the first one that they did that in, and there was one, and I did a scene uh, when and George Pell said it really pissed me off. George Pell one time said, "Russ, do it like Mickey Rooney would do it," and I said, "What me? Why didn't you hire Mickey Rooney to do this?" So that kind of bothered me, but
Well, you have you have a comfort also in comedy, and I'll tell you one of the movies I discovered a long time ago, but I think still plays. I went into public relations for 30 years, so when I came across a movie that is about Navy public relations officers called "Don't Go Near the Water." I
Yeah.
said, "Well, this is an area I think I've heard of." So a bunch of PR guys on an island. It's an actually pretty funny movie.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad you like it. I loved working on it. I thought it was, I had a great time, and I became good friends with Glenn Ford, who of course was the star of the movie, and also Gia Scala, who played opposite Glenn. But started dating her. I started going out with her, so I got to know her really well. And
She had kind of a sad life, unfortunately, I think.
oh, horrible life, yeah. She started drinking, and I think that heavily, and I think I was partly responsible because I encouraged her. She used to come to my beach house, and I'd pour her a Black Russian.
Oh, there you go. You contributed to the delinquency of GS.
Yeah,
Um, Ensign Tyson, he's a funny character. That the sequence with you and Glenn and Mickey Shaughnessy, everything out of his mouth is a swear word, which of course they bleep out with that foghorn. It's
yeah,
just hysterically funny.
it was a funny idea, yeah. And he was great. Mickey Shaughnessy really knew how to, how to do that character. He was a comedian, a stand-up comedian, so he was great in that role.
Was that all filmed pretty much in and around California? Pretty much.
It was all filmed at MGM.
It was.
Maybe on the back lot, I think we did something, but it was all filmed
And then
on the MGM lot.
and you had that wonderful character actor, Fred Clark, who played the head of the PR unit. They called him Marblehead.
Yeah,
Well,
he's
going
great.
from, I'm sorry, go ahead.
He's a good actor
Good
and
actor.
very quiet. He always didn't talk very much. He was on the set between scenes. He was always doing a crossword puzzle.
Hmm. So I'm going to go from Go Near the Water to a much darker story, which I think you were a welcome presence in, which of course is The Haunting. Now, when people ask me what is the scariest movie I've ever seen in my life, I unequivocally say The Haunting. And what helps me in this movie, Russ, and I think it's probably true for many viewers, is that you are kind of a relief because you have a little bit of a touch of ironic comedy to you as the nephew of the lady who owns this whacked out house.
Right.
And I thought it was I actually got a chance to talk to Robert Wise a little bit because I interviewed him for one of his previous movies, which you remember, The Day the Earth Stood Still, one of the great science fiction movies. And of course, you worked with him on West Side Story. Tell us a little bit about this experience. This is another opportunity for you to go over to England.
Yes, and it was weird because he had just directed West Side Story, and uh, and it was completely different doing The Haunting because working with Bob Wise. Because in West Side Story there was so much going on, so many characters, and also he's co-directing with Jerry Robbins. So I hardly got to see him at all. I hardly got them other than doing the scenes. But when The Haunting came up and I ended up doing it, um, we used to have dinner together, and we became really like good friends. I thought on that movie, and he was one of my favorite directors. I think because he never gave a lot of directions. He would give a little bit, which is I always liked a director that's sort of like a traffic cop. They don't get in the car and drive you there. They just point you in the right direction. And he knew how to do that.
Well, the way it was shot, it's just a brilliant film in many ways. It just doesn't get you. You get very unsettled from the very start when they start talking about the history of the house. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, it was shot at a hotel. That was a hotel.
Uh, yes, it was true, and they cleaned it up a lot. In fact, I took my wife Bonnie when we went there to do something else what I was working on, and so we drove up to Stratford upon Avon, which is where the house was, and Robert Wise went to great lengths to find a house that was in the haunted house uh, category. He went to and found out which what would one of the most haunted houses in the country was this particular place where we shot the exteriors, and it was that house that was haunted. And when we went to visit it later, it became like a five-star hotel, and they never told anybody about that there was ghosts actually that lived there in the house, and that every once in a while, and it actually happened. So when we went there, and when my wife Bonnie and I uh, met the guy who ran the hotel, the manager, and he said, "Well, we don't tell anybody about the ghosts in here because we don't want to scare anybody to death." But he said yes, and then he showed us in the library where the wall actually is like out of a Abbott and Costello movie, where there actually a bookcase in the library turned around and you could walk and go in a tunnel. So it was incredibly interesting.
But what you're saying is all of the interiors that of the house were built on a soundstage.
Yes. Oh yeah, the inside was actually like a hotel. It had rooms and
Well, like I said, you're a breath of fresh air in this very stuffy house. Tell me a little bit about your co-stars. You interesting group of people: Claire Bloom, Julie Harris, Richard Johnson. What do you remember about them?
well, the main thing I remember is that, like in the previous movie that I did with Bob Wise, West Side Story, there were so many in the cast. I mean, gang members, and it was like a huge, huge, big deal. And this was a lot more intimate, which was fun. There was just us, and there were very few in the cast. I mean, mainly just four of us that worked all the time. That went through the house and with these things happening. So and that part of it I thought that was pretty interesting in the fact that that nobody had any really sense of any ghosts of being there. I went looking for one night, but
On the soundstage?
no, when we were doing the exteriors,
Oh, okay.
and we that was the one night that we were staying there in the house, in the hotel.
Oh, you stayed there in the hotel. Okay.
One night, yeah, one night while they were shooting exteriors of the scene where Julie Harris leaves, and gets in her car and is leaving. So all the lights, my room was right up above where they were shooting, and and it was a lot of noise and a lot of lights from the light machines that they had going. So I thought, well, I think I'll take a walk around the back of the house, and the back of it, of where they said the ghost often appears. And or does appear back on there. So I got there and I started to walk out, but it was pitch black. I couldn't see a thing. But I found that if I walked backwards, I could see the reflection of the arc lights that were on the other side of the house, and they sort of lit up the pathway just a little bit, enough so that I could follow it if I walked backwards. A lot of people don't understand it. I don't understand it myself exactly. But I walked backwards and I got to a point where I thought there was like a little graveyard in the back of it. And that's where I got close to it. And suddenly I it felt like somebody put a block of ice on the back of my neck. And I literally could feel it. And had this feeling that if I turned around, I could see the ghost, which is what I wanted to see. But I decided I did not want to turn around, and so I just ran back to the hotel and went back, and that was my ghost experience.
Well, I can feel that ghost experience. But the movie today is a masterful work, especially for the listeners and viewers who have never seen The Haunting. It's not a typical horror movie. You never see anything, but it's
No
scary.
blood, that's right.
It's all sound. And the sequence, I know you're not in the sequence per se. You and Richard Johnson are walking down the hall at one point, but when Claire Bloom and Julie Harris are in bed and they
Oh, yeah.
start hearing that pounding, I watched the movie one night at home alone and I had to almost turn it off because it was just too, it was scary. It was very scary. Before we end our conversation, I want to pull up another picture, which has always been a favorite of mine. And let's see if I have it here. Dee, 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 dee. Yes, the Longships.
Oh, yeah.
The Longships is an epic adventure. It isn't run as much as it should because I think it's a terrific adventure film. And there you get a chance to use some of your acrobatic skill. This is a big epic movie. You got a chance to work with Richard Widmark and Sidney Poitier. Was it a fun experience for you, Russ?
A great experience. It was one of my favorite experiences. And I became good friends with Sydney. Um, we became really good pals. And I loved working on it. And I just loved him. I right from the beginning he when he first came on the set, where the first day that he arrived on the set, and they were doing a scene where he was the head of the group. I forget what they were called, but Sydney came in and he looked around and he was ready to do the scene and he looked around and he said, where is my black army? And they said, well, they're here. Uh, and there were white guys in makeup, in dark makeup. And that was not what you wanted to do with Sydney, you know. So he said, well, he says, they said, why didn't you get black men to play the ones in my army and not put black makeup on them? And they said, well, we couldn't find any in Yugoslavia in Belgrade at that time. Said there were there were no black people that we could use as your army. And so Sydney said, well, I'll tell you what, I'm going back to my hotel now, and I'm going to wait there until you find some black men. And she said, if you don't know where they are, try going to Africa and finding them there. I'm sure there's a few black people in Africa. And he walked off the set, and I fell in love with him. After that, I thought, wow, that's really cool that he would do that.
I
And
mean, imagine today, they would shut down the production within a millisecond. I mean, my God, the whole concept of black-faced guys, that's just terrible.
yeah,
Terrible.
well, this was Yugoslavia, and it was a weird, weird kind of place, the producers, and
Did they make some real Viking ships? Did they construct them from scratch for the reproduction?
I don't know. I'm pretty sure they did. Yeah, and that
You're,
was
you're
fun. The ships that they did, that they uh, that they had. They It was just a great experience. It was really fun. It almost made you a child again. Playing
Well,
part.
it's like you said, goes back to your first movies you saw as a kid, the Westerns, playing dress up. Absolutely. Widmark, obviously a major star in Hollywood. Was he accessible? Did he keep to himself? What kind of guy was he?
He was trying to think of the word for it, for somebody that's it's kind of like an asshole at sometimes,
Passive aggressive?
I remember the first day that we got into Yugoslavia, into Belgrade, and they accidentally took my suitcases, I think, and they put them in his room. And he opened the door and threw them all out. He just threw them, and those aren't my suitcases. And so he had a real, uh, but I think because of the director of
Jack
the
Cardiff?
huh?
Jack Cardiff?
Yeah, the Jack Cardiff was really a great director for intimate, intimate and slow kind. And Widmark hated that. He wanted a really outdoor kind of director that was more, yelling a lot, and so he gave the director a really hard time.
It's
And
funny because the action sequences in the movie are brilliant. I mean, the battle on the beach where you're defending the ship against those cavalry, and then another sequence which is kind of scary for a little kid to see, where they threaten to put him on the Widmark's character on the Mare of Steel. That
yeah,
thing was going to slice him in half. I mean, that was. I love the fact that Sydney's wife in the movie, Rosanna Schiaffano, I think is her name. She has to choose the guard who's going to test the Mare of Steel. And I always wondered about that, what the guard was thinking, don't choose me. That's a pretty good one. Well, we're almost done, but before we end, Russ, I've got to mention your artwork because you are known a lot for your artwork. You left acting to a certain extent and became a fine artist. I wanted to put up one of your pieces. I pulled this off the internet. Can you tell the audience what I'm looking at right here? What is this called?
well, I did a series of art pieces called circles, I think.
The spheres.
Spheres, and it was basically like planets, but my own planets, so they weren't like really copies of anything else.
What
And
kind of medium is this? What are we looking at?
mixed medium, it's actually collage.
Collage.
Like that piece is all little pieces of paper. I used to cut out paper in magazines that had a lot of texture, and I would cut them out and I would put them in piles so there were different colors and almost like a palette. But instead of the palette being paint, I was like pieces of paper, and that's how I did a lot of pieces like uh, that I used for collage.
How long would something like this take?
Well, there was never a law of like doing. some pieces I only use, some pieces I use like thousands of pieces of paper, and then other pieces I would use maybe one or two
Hmm.
pieces of paper if it was fit, if it was something that I took something out of one thing and put it in another. I know that I had a picture of uh, I had a just for instance, there was a photo of Princess Di,
Mhm.
and Diana, and she was sort of covering her eyes, and then I put in this other picture, like in back of her, with a little boy peeing against the wall. You know, that was the idea. So it was just one piece of there that made the collage for me. So it was whatever, and I did a lot of pieces like that, both where I used a lot of paper and somewhere I used one piece. There was never a law against what I was going to do.
In the book, it says that you took the parchment or the paper, which was your Academy Award nomination for Peyton Place, and you threw it up on your roof, and
Yeah.
then you found it years later, and you turned it into an art piece. Is that true?
Yes, I still have it here. Where is it?
It's there. It's
Oh, it's
behind.
right there on the wall, right in the center there. Absolutely.
Oh, you can see it right in the center, right? Yeah, that's what I did with it. I didn't have much respect, I guess, for it.
Well, the book for the listeners and viewers is a great view of Russ's film career, but it also and his television, but it also goes deeply into how he embraced the art colony in Topanga and became part of that whole world of art creating and the people you met, the interesting people. It's really a terrific autobiography. Um,
I used to say that the difference between the performing arts, making movies and plays, the difference between that uh, and uh, and the fine arts is that in the performing arts you do whatever you can to make the audience's head spin, but in fine art you do whatever you can to make your own head spin. That's the difference.
sure. Now, are you still working on your art?
Not not recently. I've been spending the last 25 years getting this book in order.
Well, thank goodness for that because the book Dancing on the Edge. You're also the father of a very fine actress, Amber Tamblyn. That's probably been a great source of joy for you.
Oh, it has. I mean, uh, she used to be Russ Tamblyn's daughter. Um,
Now
now,
you're Amber Tamblyn's father.
which is
Well,
I love it. In fact, I did a play. I directed a
Musical.
a play of Neil Young, and they used to, and I had a dressing room because I directed the show, and so they took my name one time, Russ Tamlin, and they took it off the door, and I came in one night and they said, Amber Tamlin's dad. That was on the
I
door.
hear that she's now starting to direct herself.
Well, she directed a movie and she's just really active. She's quite brilliant. She's smarter than I am, and she's
During all the course of your work in film, did you ever were you ever offered the opportunity to direct something?
no.
And it wasn't something you were pursuing.
Well, I guess I did in a way. I did the movie with Neil Young, and I
Human highway.
Human Highway was the movie, and I choreographed it and co-directed it. So I had that opportunity to
Sure.
do it.
Well, we have been listening and watching Russ Tamblyn, the author of this wonderful book, Dancing on the Edge. I recommend it to anybody who's interested in show business and the art world. And Russ, sincerely, thank you for all of your good work over the years. It's just brought so much pleasure to so many people and continues to do, and probably will do so forever.
Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure doing the interview for you.
Thank you. Thank you. You've been listening to Saturday Night at the Movies. I'm your host, Steve Rubin. Our producer is Ben Shrewsbury. We're now on all the podcast platforms, and we now have a YouTube channel. Look for our social media postings. If you type in Stephen J. Rubin Saturday Night at the Movies on YouTube, that's Jay, you'll find us. Russ, be well, and thank you.
Thank you, Steve.